Hi, and welcome to the next episode of Circling the Dream. This interview was recorded at the Fest Film Festival in Portugal. It's a lovely little festival. If you haven't been there before, check it out. It's held in June every year in a place called Espinho, which is just south of Porto. It's lovely, great beach, very sunny, lovely bunch of people. Whilst I was out there, I bumped into one of the legends of the sound world who agreed to sit down and have a cup of tea. His name's Eddy Joseph. He's a sound supervisor who worked through the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s on some of the most amazing films you've ever heard. Things like Casino Royale, Harry Potter films, and many, many more films. He'll talk about them all during the interview. This interview covers lots of interesting areas, but for me the thing that was most fascinating was when he talks about the change from analog to digital and the appearance of the earliest digital audio workstations. It's a kind of time that I was coming into the sound world, so I found it quite, fascinating. Anyway, as ever, if you enjoy this, please hit the subscribe button. I'd be eternally grateful. And now, on with the show. Here is Eddy. Thank you very much for doing this.
You're very welcome.
So we've both been at the Fest Festival for a few days, meeting lots of people who want to get into the audio industry. What have you picked up from them?
Apart from enthusiasm, they all want to be directors or producers, maybe writers. Very few editors, no one doing sound, I don't think, this year.
Really?
Oh, look. We're interrupted by the cleaning lady.
I know, but I think it was quite nice in a way.
Yeah, it was real.
Yeah, it is.
Just in case.
So you think that they all want to be directors? We haven't met many sound people.
No. There's only ever been one. The young chap who was helping me called Vasco.
Okay.
He was the one 8 or 9 years ago. He was there, and he was the one who showed enthusiasm, and he's doing really well in the sound side of here.
In Portugal?
Yeah.
Oh, I've met quite a few actually that want to be soundies.
Have you?
Yeah. Not that many. Under 10.
Oh, well. There's about 800 people here.
I know, exactly. So it's quite a small kind of...
Yeah.
How do they feel to you compared to the youngsters of when you were coming into the business?
Just a totally different thing. I mean, I never saw anybody. We were trainees. We were second assistant editors or whatever. We were working in a studio, mostly, sometimes in Soho, but nowhere else. And you only met your own breed. I mean, it used to be great because you wander around the studio hoping to see a star, but I mean, other than that, you were in your room, in the canteen, often in the pub. We were being trained, whether we knew it or not, or whether that was what we wanted, I don't know. But that was the way it was done.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. I mean, I didn't even think about it, I just went with it.
And there was no formal sound education?
There were no university courses. The National Film School hadn't started. There was no way you could learn your trade other than by apprenticeship.
With another sound?
With a sound editor, a picture editor, or whatever. I mean, we were kind of... There was no formal training for sound at all. It seemed to me that the way the structure was, you were a trainee, then you were a second assistant picture, then you could either be a sound assistant, which would be a dubbing assistant editor,
right,
or a first assistant editor. They were kind of on par. And then you could either become a sound editor or hopefully a picture editor, maybe an assembly editor in between. But it was a kind of like a stairwell going up. Ooh, a cup of tea, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
It was a very strange training because you didn't even know you were being trained. Just a job. I mean, the industry was really interesting, but we were in some little hole somewhere, which if you're lucky had a window, In
Soho?
I was in Soho, yeah. I worked for a commercials company in Soho for a year, and I got my ticket then, my union card. That was called Illustra Films, and they were one of the new breed of commercials company. Had young, aspiring directors and so on and so forth. 3 producers who had good expense accounts, and
right.
But it was great. Just walking through Soho, seeing all the sights and
quite seedy,
involved in it. Yeah, but that was part of the excitement, of course.
I know, of course. Well, I mean, when I first came to London, which was only 30 years ago, it was still pretty seedy.
Only 30 years. Oh, yes, it was, yeah.
But for me, I thought it was exciting. It felt very kind of...
It was more exciting than a studio, certainly.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, I was out at Denham's Film Studios, which just felt like being in the countryside, you know?
Yeah.
Did you work up there?
I worked at Anvil.
Oh yeah, I remember Anvil.
And did you ever know Mary, the tea lady? Mary was great because she'd been there forever and knew everybody. And John would come in. I think he was recording the score for Dracula, which was a TV thing actually. Frank Langella, I think. I seem to Langella, whatever. I think he was Dracula in it. I went on the stage because I loved it, you know, full orchestra, and they had this amazing organ. It was a Yamaha, but it's 6 keyboards and a sort of slide keyboard. You could do bagpipes and things like that. I mean, it was absolutely...
When was that? What kind of...
Stereo. What was I doing in the Bits probably? So it would be 79.
So when you left school...
Yeah.
Did you go straight into the film?
No. The careers master and my parents thought because I could do mathematics I'd be a great accountant. And I knew it was wrong from like day 3, and it took me all that time to get out of it. And I did. My parents were pretty upset. I wasn't. I was very happy to have it. But funnily enough, having a training as an accountant has been invaluable over the years.
Really?
Absolutely. My brain is able to deal with that, all that sort of thing. And although it's a loathsome thing having to do books and things, it's easy.
But I'm guessing as a sound supervisor, it's probably incredibly useful, no? I mean,
I've no idea. I hadn't considered that.
No, I mean, you're thinking, you know, all the money that you have to do.
Oh, I certainly had to do all the budgeting, which I had no problem with.
But I'm guessing you got a lump of money to pay all your team at once or twice a month or whatever, no?
Once a week. They always wanted their money. Still do, I should think. But I think that we had an agreement, if you got your timesheet in on a Monday, then you get paid on a Friday.
So that's an interesting topic. It's the whole sound supervision thing. How did you go from cutting film to being in sound to being a sound supervisor?
Well, let's bypass making pork pies and sausages, the postman, the plastic cases for lipsticks, working for the Inland Revenue. There was also accountancy again. All these things took me until I was nearly 22. And finally my dad, in a sort of desperation, saying, well, what do you want to do? And I said, oh, I'd like to get in the industry like you, Dad. Because he'd said...
Oh, he was in film?
Yeah. But he had said he would never want or allow any of his offspring to get in the industry because it was so precarious. I mean, all his life he was going backwards and forwards, sort of doing battery hens at the bottom of the garden to making Edwardian fern cases. I mean, he did all sorts of things. He's really good at just keeping the money coming in somehow or other. Yeah. Before the war, he worked for Hitchcock at Ealing and Shepherd's Bush, and
doing what?
He was a third assistant director.
Okay.
His job was basically to open up all the cutting rooms and make tea and so on and so forth. Learned his trade. After the war, he came back, and I was born, and he hadn't seen me ever. You know, he came back, and I was already 9 or 10 months old, but then he got offered a movie as a second assistant director, I think, in maybe 47, 48, and stayed in the industry ever since. Eventually, he produced for Joe Yanni and John Schlesinger.
Really? So he became a producer?
Yes, mostly associate producer, but he did produce. Things like Far From Wedding Crowd.
It's always impossible to tie down what a producer
actually means, because it means so many different things.
Now it's totally different.
It's like people who bring money, you know, or...
It's exactly that. I was watching something the other day, some Netflix or Prime Video or whatever, and they counted 18 executive producers.
Exactly.
So they all put in £5.
Anyway. So how did you go then from...
Okay. How did... eventually, this is in 67. Dad said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, do you know, I would like to get in the film industry. Because, the film industry was in the house all the time. It was always there. Yeah. So he called around a few mates, and one production manager said, well, I'll need a runner on my film called Salt and Pepper. And Salt and Pepper was a vehicle for Sammy Davis Jr. and Peter Lawford. Wow. So my job, what the runner was doing the Roneo sheets for the call sheets for the next day, and opening up rooms and making cups of tea, and it was fascinating. Yeah. But I was also Sammy Davis Jr.'s pimp. No, he was lovely. He was absolutely lovely. He stayed at the Mayfair because he was allowed through the front door. He was allowed, not he was welcome, but he was allowed through the front door. But he was one of the kindest people I've ever met.
Really?
Yeah, it was really lovely. But then I had a problem. I mean, I was staying in a little room near Shepperton Studios, which was pretty ghastly, but fun, because it meant I could go into the Shepperton Studio bar in the evening, and everyone went there, the actors and all the cast from Oliver. They were all in there because they were just about to shoot. Peter Noon from Herman's Hermits.
Wow.
He was there, and he and I used to spend the evenings drinking beer, where he had to pay because I had no money. I was getting £12 a week then.
£12 a week.
But I got overtime.
Okay.
And
this was unionised, was it?
Well, no, because runners aren't in a union. So I know it's all part of the sound.
The joys of sound, isn't it?
Yeah,
Got to
exactly.
keep that in.
Yeah, of course. You wouldn't want to filter that out. The problem was at the end that I didn't have a union card to become a third assistant director, which would have been a natural progression.
Right.
And I'd met quite a few people in the bar, and there was a girl in the bar called Pepita Fairfax, who came from the Fairfax tribe, clan, whatever, who had a big castle down in Arundel or something.
Right.
And she said, I often work for a commercials company, Illustra Films in Soho, and they're always looking for people as trainees. She said, but you'd have to train in the editing side there, and eventually then you get a ticket. And to cut a long story short, I became the accountant at Illustra Films for about 6 months, sorted out their books. They then got a new person in to take over as bookkeeper, and I was allowed to train as an assistant editor. And that was it. That was the life changer. Because when I got my ticket, a friend of mine I'd met and said, "Do you want to work on a TV series of Pinewood?" I said, "Yeah." So I was my money went up to about £26 a week, I seem to remember, which was a lot of money then.
Yeah,
Plus overtime, I was probably getting £35 a week, and I was feeling, I made it.
And this was picture editing.
Yeah, yes, because there was no way coming in as a sound editing. That was part of the progressive steps. You had to get beyond that step to start getting. I didn't do any sound work at all till 1970, and I was working with a picture editor called Keith Palmer. It's a very, very good editor who couldn't get a picture to cut, but he was offered a picture to do sound. And it was an Australian film called Wake in Fright, with Donald Pleasance amongst others in it, and it was a cracking good film, but scary as hell, and with rather nasty undertones and murdering kangaroos so they could eat the balls. That kind of. It was a very, very tough film. Since it's been recognised in Australia as one of the top Australian films of all time.
But I mean, were you instantly captured by it, or
by sound?
Yeah.
Well, in a way, I worked on this film called I Start Counting, and I was the second assistant editor. Money gone up to 30 quid a week.
Right.
And Alan Bell was brought on as the sound editor. It was about a 6-week shoot. So Alan started preparing a library. Mostly you would ring up the library and you would give them a list. Or later days you could send a fax. and they would go through all the books and shelves and so on, and they would pull out effects that they thought would work. You would then go maybe 2 weeks later, and you wouldn't have a picture, but you would go, and it would say Ford Anglia 1200cc at 30 mile an hour on gravel turning.
Right. And this was on tape or on vinyl?
They would either have it on tape or they would have it on 35.
Oh, okay.
Or optical. Even an optical, they'd have it. You'd hope it was tape because the quality would be better, but it would probably be transferred from optical anyway.
Yes, exactly.
So there's hiss and hum and so on. But at the end of that day, it included a fabulous lunch at an Italian restaurant in Elstree.
Circling the Dream.
Joan Collins, I mean, my goodness me. I spent a lot of time with Auntie Joan.
Oh,
she was lovely.
Really?
And not many people know this, but she's got freckles.
Oh.
I won't tell you where, no on her face, because I saw her before makeup. Because she'd always say, you can't cut from that side, darling. And she said, because I've got a little sort of dimple there, and my left side's better. And so without makeup, it was interesting just to see her skin was great, but there were freckles.
Interesting. So, as a picture editor, do you think it helped your sensitivities as a sound editor?
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Absolutely. They separate the two categories, but they're very similar.
Yeah.
And I was cutting film, and I was, well, I'm going to cut from there to there. Let's find the right place to do it on the moviola and mark it with a chronograph pencil, make the join. Yeah, that's okay. That's the next bit there. Oh, yeah, he says to her, she says to him, cut back. David Lean said, and he knew about these things. He said you should only cut when you have to. I mean, if it works without, why would you? If you're making all your points, everything you want to do in one shot, why have two?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a very fair.
And I think it's still valid, but
yeah.
I think it's lovely sometimes when you can sit back and allow it to take shape and everything instead of going.
So then, from being in sound editorial to sound supervision, that's quite a big leap, isn't it?
Yes. I had done, as part of my craft training, I'd been able to do the dialogues on the film, Foley on a couple of films, music editing on a couple of films, all their own trade. I mean, they're all very different, but they all add up. Right. And they added up to being a supervisor, and that was in 81, and Alan Parker called me from California and said, I've got this film. I said, I know, I'm hoping to work on it in some capacity. And he said, would you like to be the supervisor on it?
And that was Midnight Express?
No, that was Shoot the Moon. I'd worked with Jerry Hambling, the editor, on Midnight Express and Fame, and I cut about 40 minutes of Fame.
Oh, really?
And that was quite good, doing dance numbers and so on.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it. But, you're listening all the time. That's why I'm saying there's not much difference, really. Editing sound or editing picture. Editing picture's eyes, but editing is ears. So there's not a lot. They're quite close to each other, and they assist each other, which is the point. So, I mean, I hadn't supervised a whole film. I'd shot ADR, I'd done crowd, I'd done all the elements, but not all together.
But obviously you had been in teams and you'd seen the role of supervision.
Yeah.
So you knew what was expected of you.
It never really worried me. I didn't have panic attacks and things about how the hell am I going to do it. Shoot the Moon was a relatively linear film, quite simple.
Okay.
But it had to be done quickly because Alan unexpectedly was having to shoot Pink Floyd The Wall. He didn't think he was going to, because Michael Saracen was going to do it. And Michael Saracen got out of it for whatever reason.
I mean, just to step back a little bit, you were talking about doing, dialogues and Foley and blah, blah. I mean, this was all using 35mm dubbers and such like, wasn't it? Yeah.
Moviola, synchronizer, rubbish speaker, everything is archaic as hell. But Like very well everything, if you get used to it, then it becomes second nature. You don't hear the clattering sound of the moviola. Your brain eliminates that, and you're hearing the pure sound that you need to. But I couldn't believe it when finally that transition came to working on a digital machine.
Yeah.
I didn't like it at all because it was going to take a lot of work from people, from those who weren't prepared to learn.
But now, when you listen back to a film that was done on 35mm, what's your thoughts on the quality of the sound?
I think it's very good. Mostly, it's very much simpler.
It is.
It had to be because you didn't have the facility for playing on so many tracks. Elstree had the most playoff dubbers.
And how many?
It was a maximum of about 16. You could play it at a time.
Be like 4-track machines or?
No, 1 track.
1 track each.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So when you were track laying, when we started track laying stereo, we had to sort of have our mono track, and initially we were sort of laying up mono and stereo on the same track.
Right.
So we'd have to go on a 3-track machine, and they only had 4 of those. So we said, okay, well, let's keep the monos as monos. I mean, obviously you've got to do your dialogue 1, 2, 3 for Phil, 4 for ADR, and maybe 5, perhaps a crowd, 6 or 7. But I mean, they're basically monos.
Amazing.
So your dialogue premix comes out of 6 or 7 monos.
How those machines stayed in sync? Well, I mean, sometimes they
did. Well, Twickenham they didn't. They didn't have Magnus sync. I did a film there with Robin O'Donoghue, and it was something was going on in the back, and they could never find out what it was. But when they put up the premix with the picture, it was always out of sync.
Yeah.
And I used to at night say, don't worry, Robin, I'd take the 35 premix, dialogue premix, and sync it up to the picture, which is putting a frame in there and taking a frame out there. I mean, it was absolutely mad because the director, John A. Meal, was saying, I don't know what's going on. And Robin said, don't worry, dear, it'll be all right. You know, looking at me saying, please cut it, Ed. So that was my evening job, you know.
So these dubbers were just being pumped straight into an analogue desk, yeah?
Yeah.
And then out to what, a stereo master?
They were going out to a 35 dubber, yeah. To 35,
doing stereo
3-track.
They
They were going 3-track then, and then eventually they went to 6. But not many people were doing that. I mean,
6 being...
The 6-track was the magnetic 6, so you could go into 5. That was your 5.1, but magnetic still.
You were doing surround.
Pink Floyd The Wall was 6-track magnetic split surround. It splits around. And that's 82.
But that was right at the beginning of all that.
40 years ago.
Yeah.
And it was the loudest thing that had ever been done. A friend of mine who was the sound camera at Elstree, because it still had to be processed onto a Dolby stereo, and it was his job to have the mix down like a 4-track, a relative 4-track magnetic, and he had to put it on as a Dolby digital.
Right.
Not Dolby digital, Dolby stereo. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And he said it's the loudest thing he'd ever got on. He said he really, he just went through it and pushed it to get it. When I played it at the Empire 2, Leicester Square, what was it, the Ritz it used to be called? I don't know. I played it there, and I said to the projectionist, can we play it at the right level, please? And when he did it, and flakes started coming off the ceiling. I mean, it was fabulous.
It's amazing.
Beautifully loud. I mean, it was one of those. Ba-bang, bang. On Pink Floyd The Wall, we had the original floor masters of the disc.
Right.
And there were two 24s and 116 Studers.
Right. Oh, okay.
And they had a time links interlock for the 3 and the desk.
Wow.
And it took up to 30 seconds for them to all go into... So we'd have to go all the way back there and sort of wait. And the guy would say, 2 are on, 3rd on now. So they could then start mixing. I mean...
So they were all just chasing LTC?
Yeah. I don't know how we did it, really.
Circling the Dream. So then the move to digital must have been
traumatic.
For you personally, yeah?
Yes, but I was, you know how luck is, it just happens, and this is one of those incidences. I was doing the Crying Game at Twickenham, and I was walking past the cutting room. John Bloom's was editing something at the time, and he said, "What are you doing next?" And I said, "Oh, I don't know." He said, "Are you going to do a digital one?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to have to learn at some point, otherwise I'll be out of work, you know." And he said, "This film is a Louis Malle film, and his recordist has recorded all the dialogues as digital."
On what, an Agua D or something?
No, it was in fact, it was a DAT player, it was a 4-track, 2-track DAT. And no one could auto-conform it anyway. And so, I mean, I said, yeah, I'd love to. So they said, well, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll see if we can get someone to teach you when you start on the film at half pay. So they do 3 weeks half pay learning, but actually working on it.
Right.
And then, you know, you'll be up to speed. And after 3 weeks, I wasn't up to speed, but I knew how it worked and I hated it.
And what was the machine you were using then?
I was using a DAR, and I loved after a month or so. I mean, I just loved it. You could sling it around a room, and it would still do it. Yeah. You know, I mean, it was a tough old thing. I mean, it cost me a fortune, but I was rewarded by it because it really, you know, I learned so much. And gradually, as the machine improved from an 8-track, 16, 24, and so on, you know, then you could have a bigger library on the top line and so on. Oh, it was just great.
And so I'm guessing all of your team needed to...
Well, no, we had to share because they were like 100 grand at that time.
But they all needed to know how to use it.
They had to learn, yes. So they were like in the evenings and things, when people went home, they learned.
So who would have been in your team at that time when that crossover happened?
Well, Nigel Mills taught me because he had used one in a recording studio.
Oh, okay.
So he wasn't doing that well, I don't think, in a recording studio, and decided he wanted to go into features. So his way was to come in and he taught Glenn Fremantle and me.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And Glenn and I worked together on a few films then.
Interesting.
You know, I'd bring Glenn on because he could use one, and he would bring me on because I could use one.
Yeah.
And that was how that worked. Yeah, that would have been 92, something like that.
Oh, that's fine. So you kept on using the DAR?
I used the DAR then for 10 years. I used it up to 2003, so that's 11 years, say. Not without problems, but I hauled it around the world. It went all over the place, in Germany.
And you owned one of your own?
I owned one and a backup one, like a storage one. And yeah, I had all the equipment. I had a big mixing desk. I mean, the change from 35 to that was remarkable, and how much I could do. And you know, I learned tricks like using a Core Game 1 to get the lowest note possible, and then record it onto the DAR. The DAR
slow it down again,
and so it right down to like 1%. So it became a space engine or whatever.
Yeah. What about mixing then? Did you ever do any mixing?
Well, I did my own. I mean, in that, if I had a load of mono elements and I wanted to give something to the director, you know, the editor or the director wanted to have, let's say on Harry Potter or something. Excuse me, perspiring.
No, it's
what I do.
Just for the sake of the audience, we are in Portugal and it is very warm.
and more than that. On Harry Potter, Chris Columbus wanted to hear some mono effects of, say, I don't know, of Quidditch or something. So Martin Cantwell, the sound designer, and myself would lay out everything we needed to and do a mono mix, which the editor would then put into his Avid. So he'd always have it there. The advantage of that, there were lots of advantages. One of them was that the director got used to the effects.
Exactly that.
And it's so important, and I would recommend to any sound editor, get your effects in as soon as possible, and ADR.
Yeah.
If you've shot ADR, get the editor to put it in. Because there's nothing worse than being on the mixing desk and you're doing your final mix and the people not liking things. You ain't got time for them.
No.
Not really.
Have you always been quite good at pushing people on then?
Yeah.
Because you strike me as quite no-nonsense, it's kind of...
Yeah, but I have a way of doing it.
No, of course.
I'm not up front and aggressive.
No, but
and the other way,
diplomatic,
quietly.
firm.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And the amount of rows were very few, but very big. The ones I've had.
Yeah.
Well,
that's kind of...
as I said in my talk the other day, there's no point in a director choosing me as their sound editor if they don't let me get on with it.
Yeah.
Because all I'm trying to do. The guy today was a Portuguese director of photography who said his job was to help the director with storytelling. It's the job of us all. That's what we do.
That was the one today, wasn't it?
Yeah. That was. Yeah. You won't go to that. That's about what I remember. Actually,
I think we agree.
I think I slept through most of it. I know I snored.
Did you?
Because I heard myself.
I noticed you were asleep, but I didn't hear you snoring.
Sleep on and off for about an hour, I think. Oh.
What's that?
Is there any chance of another cuppa, Christina? Please. I'm going at 6. I'm going to see the Canadian Girls' little presentation up at Multimage.
What's that one?
I don't really know, but they're very pretty, so I thought I'd say. I just said yes.
What a great guy. I feel really privileged to have had that time with Eddy. He's great company, and he's got a story for everything. But just don't go for dinner with him if you can help it, because he makes you eat these things called goose barnacles, and they're absolutely disgusting. But he loves them to bits, so you just smile and tuck them away. Anyway, the next interview will be with a young mixer working in London called Sam Castleton. He is focused on factual TV, comedy, a lot of comedy actually, and drama as well. He has a really interesting take on things, and he has an interesting story to tell as well. So if you've enjoyed this, please hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications button, hit the like button, and hopefully I'll see you again for the next episode in 2 weeks' time. See you then.